In today's conversation, I chat with Alli Torban, who is an information designer, a podcaster, a dataviz today, and a data literacy advocate. Alli is also the author of ChartSpark, a book that will show you how to harness your creativity in data communication to stand out and innovate. Among other things, we talk about the difference between artistry and creativity, how podcasts can act as a conversation lifeline, how to go about teaching yourself to illustrate, and why pursuing your dream job might just lead you to a surprising destination. It was a fun conversation that inspired a set of 8 new comics, which you'll see appear throughout the video. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. It means a lot. And after you're done watching, check out the notes where you'll find a link to where you can see and download full versions of all the comics I shared today. For anybody who doesn't know Alli Torban, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I would love to. I'm Alli Torban. I live in the DC area, and I started out as a math major, and I got a job as a business analyst out of college, and I was running a lot of SQL queries and testing software for the government. And then I started having kids, and I figured out that this was probably a good time for me to decide what I actually wanted to do, what I was passionate about. I always felt like there was something missing. I liked the analytical stuff, but I always felt like there was something missing, which I later identified as creativity. There was something I wanted to be able to create things, not just press buttons on in a software tool and have that be what value I was bringing. I wanted to be valued for the way I think and my ideas. On the journey to figuring that out, I was trying to figure out things I could do from home that had data type things. So it was related to what I had already done, but I could also do it from home because I was staying home with my 2 daughters. And I fell into data journalism and did a few articles to a local magazine here. And I realized that there's a thing called data visualization. Wow, people actually do just the data viz part for a living. And I started listening to all these podcasts about it, storytelling with data, policy viz, data stories, and having 2 young kids, podcasts felt like my lifeline to the outside world because it can feel very isolating at home with babies who can't talk back to you and all you're doing is feeding them and keeping them alive, changing a lot of diapers. So I just loved podcasts, absorbed so many of them, and I learned a lot. And I just randomly had this idea, maybe I could start my own podcast and learn from data visualization professionals, and I could accelerate my journey into becoming a data viz designer. So for a while, I was writing in my journal every day, I want to be a visual journalist for the Washington Post. Like that was my big goal. In interviewing people on my podcast, I would also create a portfolio piece in order to build a portfolio as I was learning. So not just learning from people, but also doing something, because you can't ever make any progress if you are just absorbing information. Eventually, you're going to have to try to make something. And that really worked for me. After about 9 months, I had enough of a portfolio to start applying to part-time places. And finding a part-time job is pretty tough. But I was able to finally get a part-time data viz designer position at a research institute. I did that for about 3 years and finally decided to go freelance, went freelance and did a whole bunch of fun work, like going from dashboards even to like data comics, which I know you love. And now I work at Data Literacy. They're a training company based out of Seattle, and I'm one of 4, so we're a very small company, but we do live and on-demand data literacy trainings. And Ben, the CEO, is also working on more AI courses because that's a huge thing in the industry right now, and also very data related. Data and data viz and AI, and I help create the content for those courses and also give the courses. That's where I'm at now. And also I wrote the book ChartSpark. Can't skip over that because in that journey, I realized, I really made this transformation and anybody can do it. You just have to maybe shift your mindset on a couple different things. And here are some things that I learned along the way hopefully you start your journey a little ahead of where I was. So that was the impetus of Chart Spark. And that's been out for about 7 months now.
Awesome.
Oh, Dataviz Today is my podcast. I don't know if I said that, but you already know that.
I do, but it's nice to have you say it.
Yeah.
And I could just have it like that. And then I'll have the thing pop up and we can direct people to it.
Oh, great.
But all right, so I'm going to step back a moment and go all the way back to, were you a creative kid? Not at all.
Not in the traditional sense. So I think that if you said that to me, I immediately think you mean the kid who's like drawing all the time and constantly creating art. That's what I think when you say that. And I think that's what a lot of people think. And that's what I was trying to debunk in my book, is that creativity does not equal artistry. There's definitely a lot of creativity in artistry, but that's not all creativity is. I think creativity is remixing ideas, maybe trying a lot of different variations of an idea, and then thinking about, is this original to me or other people? Is it useful to me or other people? And it doesn't have to be original and useful to everyone, like the entire world either. It can just be new and useful to you, and that's still a creative idea. And that was another thing I was trying to debunk in my book. Like, we have these Einstein level expectation of our creativity, which I don't think is helpful at all. It keeps you from trying to be creative and thinking of new ideas. So anyway, I wasn't an artistic kid, and I don't think I was particularly someone who like tried to generate a whole bunch of new ideas either. A pretty normal kid. I feel like I was more in tune with emotions as a kid and what's happening around me, and trying to read situations, like really being obsessed. Like when I was watching TV, asking my parents, what has happened? Like I could tell like something was happening, like between the way people were looking at each other and stuff, but I couldn't understand what that meant. So I was just really obsessed with those kinds of things, just trying to understand social interactions. I think that's what I was obsessed with as a kid.
It's interesting.
Mhm.
Like write journals about it, or did you like ever try to analyze it, or was it just like a lot of questions to pick?
Just a lot of questions. A lot of questions.
A lot of questions. That's a really good setup for any kind of creative thing, right? It's just asking
Yeah.
questions and thinking a lot
And following your curiosity, right? Like
Yeah.
just allowing yourself to go down a path when you don't really know what the answer is. Because that
Were your
is
parents good
creativity.
about that? Did they like answering those questions, or did it get old?
Sometimes, yeah. I think when they're watching a TV show, before you could really pause things so easily,
Right.
we just have to stop answering your question so we can actually watch it.
That makes sense.
Before you could easily pause things, so maybe it would be a little easier nowadays.
How old are your daughters now?
They're 8 and 10.
Cool. I remember like one of the things that really re-sparked my creativity, because I was a kid who like drew a lot. I like drew a lot of pictures. They weren't good.
Yeah.
They were never good. I was never like the artistically talented kid, but I loved to draw. And I lost that through school, but it was really, having a kid was part of how I rediscovered that.
Really?
And I'm wondering if you had ever had any of these experiences when your daughters were young, like all of a sudden you have crayons again, or all of a sudden there are things around, or art classes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I mentioned the data comics. I started creating comics showing data literacy concepts. And I had never been someone to read comics. I liked them if I came across them, but I wasn't like buying books or going through the newspaper to find the comics or anything. But I was sitting in the library, I think this was in 2021, maybe just a few years ago. I was sitting in the library waiting for my daughter, who was 8 at the time, to pick out a comic book. She was really into graphic novels, still into graphic novels. And so just sitting on the bench waiting for her to pick out a book. And I had this task of creating a blog post for data literacy at the time about pie charts and just some pros and cons of pie charts. But they're like, can you try to do it in a more creative way? And I was just sitting there half thinking about this task while she was looking through her books. And I thought, oh, I wonder if I make a comic about someone like trying to make a pie chart at work and then it like all goes wrong. So just having that situation where I'm sitting there and following her interests gave me actually a creative idea to create something. And I wrote that story actually in the book because I had that idea and I immediately said, no, I'm a terrible drawer. I can't draw anything. I don't even really read comics. I don't know how to draw characters. I don't know how to make characters. I don't know how to make panels. Like, I didn't even know they were called panels. I didn't know anything. So I was just like, no, absolutely no. But then as I was sitting there, another thought popped in my head. I wonder if there are books in the library where I'm at right now that can teach you how to draw comics. And as there are lots of books that will teach you some basics about comics, like Scott McCloud's books. So many of those in the library, like literally an entire shelf of how to make comics. So if anybody's listening that wants to make their own, such a learnable skill. Yes.
Yeah.
So good. So good. So yeah, like having kids definitely introduced me to things that I wouldn't have normally noticed.
Interesting. I'd say for someone who is finding your own way creatively, your book is pretty well illustrated. And that's you, right? Like you did
Yeah.
illustrations.
Yeah. Yeah. I learned how to illustrate. Like I just started. I think I thought it would be so cool to have that skill. So I approached it the same way I approached learning data visualization, which was just to start. And I knew it was going to be garbage at the beginning, but I knew somehow I have to get over the hump. Like you have to do something. You have to, what is that saying? It's, you can't steer a stationary ship. I remember hearing that early on and just thinking, yeah, you don't know what to correct or where to steer if you don't take the first step. What I did was I had my podcast and I had started a blog associated with the podcast where I would just write like daily or weekly musings about some interesting chart that I found or whatever. And so I thought, okay, let me just illustrate the header image for that blog on my iPad. I got that Procreate app on my iPad. So I was like, let me just illustrate the blog header image. Like if it looks like garbage, like nobody really cares. And that's how I got started. And it was really terrible illustration, very basic, no shadows or highlights. I learned how that can really make or break an illustration and how refined it looks. So like super flat illustrations. But doing that allowed me to develop my style and develop my skills because I would realize, oh, something looks weird about this. And then I'd just watch a YouTube video like how to draw a simple hand or how to draw shadow, stuff like that. And then as you watch more YouTube videos and you practice, surprise, you get better.
That's right. Do you think if it wasn't for the podcast or the blog, do you think you'd be illustrating?
Good question. No, I think doing that little mini journey helped me realize like you can learn anything. You just have to be willing to be bad at the beginning.
I recognize that at least most of the people who follow my email stuff and even the ones that I teach data stuff to or work on design projects with probably they learned about me first as a cartoonist. But I'd say it was like a good year and a half, 2 years into blogging before I drew my first cartoon. And it's essentially blogging brought me into cartooning because I wanted to start illustrating. And it was the illustration, and now it's the illustrations that I get known for. And it's this weird like mix, but yeah, why? So having a blog, having a podcast, these are all personal, right? Like you just decided to start one
Yep.
and
Yep.
go for it.
Yeah. Nobody's paying me. It was definitely costing me money in terms of time and just like a small startup cost of just hosting things. But yeah, it's just more of a hobby. And I wanted to do it in order to, like I said, get a career that felt fulfilling to me. And I didn't know exactly what that looked like. And I definitely didn't become a data journalist at the Washington Post. You have to have a dream and then just pursue it and then know that you're probably going to hopefully be fulfilled in some way, but it's probably not going to look like how you expected it to look like.
It's like the plot of any good movie.
Yeah.
You head in a direction and you don't really, you want them to go in a direction, but finding the end, it's probably not the end that you set out in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel like that. They feel like they went along a certain path and they didn't end up, they couldn't have even imagined where they ended up.
Yeah.
That's the nice part about life. It's surprising.
I was looking in your book and you were talking about being an introvert.
Mm.
How, as an introvert, do you have so many conversations with people? You're so comfortable, it's seeming right now, on video.
Yeah.
In the case, or is this just practice too?
Many years of practice. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Like in the book, I say how it was hard for me to even order a sandwich from like Subway. I remember at work, we would always go to Subway for lunch. And when you go through the line, I haven't been to Subway in forever, but I'm assuming they still do this. But they ask you if you want it toasted or not, your sandwich toasted.
Right.
I would say no, but they would never be able to hear me. Not toasted. I just couldn't even say it loud enough for them to even hear. But anyway, yeah, it's just a lot of practice. And when I first started my podcast, I was too afraid to even trust myself that I would know which question to ask next. So what I did was I would give someone a questionnaire ahead of time and they would fill it out. And then I would read their responses and decide what part I wanted to focus on. And then I would write a script for myself that kind of was like just telling the story about how the person created the visualization, what I learned from it, and what I did in as my inspired visualization. And then I would just read it. And so I could record it over and over again and edit it. And I probably did that for the first 30 or 40 episodes. It took a long time for me to be, okay, I can interview someone live and I can record it and it'll be okay. So you have to take a step. Like I said, you have to take a step, and it's okay if it's like an intermediate step and it's not like the most perfect step that you could possibly take. Like, what can you do right now just to move forward?
When you first started your podcast, like the first few episodes, did you tell anybody about it? Or are you one of the people that release things and then later on you start telling people about it?
No, I think I did. I did tell people about it. And I think I didn't have any kind of social media following at all when I first started. But starting a podcast, you interview people and then they'll share it. And so that was a good way to get some early listeners. So I had maybe, I remember I released the first episode, maybe it was March 2018. And it was with Lisa Charlotte Muth, who was Lisa Charlotte Rost at the time. She works at Data Wrapper.
Mhm.
And and again, she wasn't live on the show. It was just me talking about it, her work. And yeah, she shared it. And I remember I got 100 downloads. I was like, oh my gosh, 100 people listened to it. And then, yeah, it just grew from there. Yeah, don't be afraid to make an imperfect step because it'll snowball.
Nice. Back to the challenge though. Is there anything, what's the big challenge, big struggle, things that you see in your day-to-day life? Things that you notice, social things that you pick up in the world that you're interested in, that pique your curiosity?
Specifically around dataviz kind of thing.
Doesn't have to be. Could be anything. Which is an open cartoon brainstorm right now.
I think one big thing with the creativity equals artistry thing, that's the thing that gets me riled up wanting to talk about. And then Also around dataviz, something else that gets me riled up is like when people share a graphic and they're like, "Oh, that's too hard for me to understand," or "It took me too long to understand that." And I'll have a whole bunch of critiques for it. And they don't realize, first of all, there's probably a whole bunch of things that they don't understand around the context for the visualization, who else the designer had to listen to in terms of feedback and all that stuff. But other than that, being quick to understand is not always the number one goal of a data visualization. Sometimes you want to grab attention, or you want it to be memorable, or you want them to be able to be really accurate in their interpretation. So quickness to understand something isn't always the number one goal. And I don't, I think people new to data, people who think are dabbling and think that they're like, know probably more than they do, are really quick to point out when something took them a little bit too long to understand. Maybe that wasn't the goal. There's a lot of other types of goals. And that's something that always I notice and get internally upset about.
With you, I don't know if you find this, but I know when I first got, I think I was more likely to be critical of other people's work like very early on. And then like, as time's gone on, I'm like completely the opposite.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
fine. No, it looks good. Sure.
Unless you're trying to be unethical about it, then then okay, let's talk about this. But otherwise, if you're making mistakes or I don't have any clue what your actual goal was, I'm not gonna throw my 2 cents in there. Like, have at it unless you specifically ask.
I think I have a lot to work with there.
Oh, great.
Is there any last things you want to pitch? Anything you want to talk about that we haven't talked about? So you have this book, you have a podcast. We'll direct to both. Anything else you want to push out there?
Yeah, I think those are the two big things. They go hand in hand. I reference the podcast a lot in the book and vice versa. I just hope that people feel like if you can't do it, you can just try to take a small imperfect step. And before you know it, you will be drawing comics like me and Chris.
There you go.